All right, it's so lovely to see so many people here. There's like formality conveyed by these tables and this podium is not intended, so please let all of that go and just enjoy. There's lunch at the back. Please get up and refill and help yourself throughout. I'm really excited to be continuing our partnership between Community Health Sciences and the O'Brien Institute. Just a fantastic pleasure to work with you guys, and I'm so excited to be continuing that this year. I would like to open by acknowledging there's 3 seats right up here at the front. So please, if you're sitting at the back, come on up. Come on.
Let's keep waiting people in. Let's keep waiting people in.
I would like to open just by acknowledging that the University of Calgary is located in the heart of Southern Alberta. And we both acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, the Bearspaw, and the Goodstoney First Nation. And the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3.
Okay.
Cheryl, there's
Good push. Literally seats right up. Sorry, Cheryl.
Really excited to be starting off with what I feel is an important conversation and sort of level setting as we come back in September. We're going to be talking about saying yes and no, and how to figure out when you say which of those, how to do either of them kindly, maintaining the relationships that might be put on the line when you're thinking about perhaps turning down different opportunities. And we have 2 fantastic panelists here who, the reason why they're up here is because I have seen.
Because we said yes.
Yes.
Don't know what we're talking about.
That's the irony, of course, I asked you to do this, yes, but I have seen both of you say no in different contexts, and so really excited to sort of learn from you, but I really hope this will be much more of a conversation because everybody has their own approach and their own wisdom and their own learnings from kind of practicing this throughout your careers. So Tyler, Dr. Williamson is the Center for Health Informatics Director. I'm going to keep the intros really short. And Katrina, Dr. Milaney, is the Interim Director of the O'Brien Institute. So we're going to start off just by inviting each of them to tell us about a time they said no, why they did that, how they did that, and what was the impact. And then we're going to throw it open for conversation. So Katrina,
You want me to go first? Okay.
Yeah.
I will be, yeah, no, I would be completely honest that I actually had to think about that question quite a bit. Because we are definitely not in the business of saying no. And so, but I would say probably the situation or the ask that I say no the most to would be presentations. And there's some really sort of practical reasons for that. Lots of times I think about, okay, so who's making the ask? Is it somebody, you know, that I want to nurture a relationship with? Is it somebody that is somebody that I like to work with? You know, all of those things. But really, the one situation in particular where I said no to a presentation was because it was a public presentation. Mm. And the work that I do is sometimes controversial. And it's not controversial to me, of course, but you know, I do a lot of work in harm reduction, supervised consumption clinics, homelessness, mental health, domestic violence, and those issues can be quite polarizing, and people often get very sort of passionate about what they believe about those types of issues. And the example that I'm talking about today is around harm reduction. And so I was part of a really big study a few years ago now, where we went out and met with 800 drug users all across Alberta, not alcohol and cannabis, but you know, methamphetamine and crack cocaine and fentanyl users. And we wanted to hear from them about what kinds of services they would like to access, and you know, their sort of experiences with drug use and all of that. And it was a very public kind of project, because the results were being used in part to help open supervised consumption clinics here in Calgary and across Alberta, actually. And so there was a lot of public consultation, and there were a lot of public opportunities to share their results and to talk to people about it. And to be frank, it made people really angry, and they were really angry with me, because I was in their mind advocating for this, and it was the wrong thing to advocate for. And so I got an ask to do a public presentation, actually in a pub, which should be an automatic yes. And it was a professional association, and the previous speaker that they had in the month before was our former dean. And so I thought, okay, so here's a few criteria that I would be like, for one, it's a pub, yes.
Yep.
Number two, you know, there's really important sort of prestigious people who are being asked to give these talks, so that, you know, should be a check mark. But I said no, and I said no because I felt unsafe, actually. I felt like I don't know who's going to be in the audience. I won't be in a cohort of peers. It won't be people interested necessarily in academic debate or discourse or learning. It might just be people who could be quite angry with me. So that was actually an easy no for me. But I thought about it for a really long time, and I thought, you know, have I jeopardized something because I said no to this association? And I don't know, because obviously they didn't reach out again after that. But so there was a risk, but the risk at the moment, in that moment, the risk to me and how I felt about being in that situation was greater. And so that's why I said no in that situation.
Can I ask you a follow-up question on before I
Yeah.
take my turn? How did you say no? How did you craft the like, yep, no way,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
kind of email coming back,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah, that's a really good question, because I didn't say I don't feel safe.
sure, of course not. Yeah, you guys.
I don't want people to be mad at me, but the reason I gave was legitimate, like I had a lot going on.
Yeah.
And I have to pick and choose between what I can do and when I can do it, and so the timing just wasn't, you know.
Use
That's
the timing.
that's
Yeah,
the easy thing.
yeah, okay, I appreciate that.
That's a good question.
Thanks, Katrina. Katrina and I have something cool in common that most people probably don't know, that we started the university on the same day. Both, yeah, we did. I remember like coming into and like we
Yeah.
bumped into each other like on our way up. And
Yeah.
we're like, hey, and so we've been friends ever since. Really cool little thing, but that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. The experience that I will share is not nearly as grand as that one, but it was one that that actually prompted Fiona to ask me about this. We were chatting about some other things, and I shared, at least this is my recollection, so Fiona, correct me if I lie. You know, I get a lot of requests from really excellent students to come and study with me, and I love it, and it's very flattering. And sometimes they're like incredibly promising individuals, and I'm like, it's so tempting to say yes to all of them. And then I would be supervising 300 students presently. And it's just not practical. And very recently I got one where a student reached out. It was a very carefully crafted, by the way, for the students, like, you know, it was like, this is why you're the right supervisor. This is the area that you work in. This is an area that I also work in. Like, it was like a clear matchmaking. And I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. This would be a perfect fit. But you know, it wasn't that long ago. I was like, but I am not keeping up lately. I don't know if any of you ever feel that way. I'm like looking at my email, and every day it just gets like, my inbox gets fuller and fuller, and I clear less than I get, and I'm like, I just wasn't keeping up. And so my response back at that point was fairly easy, and I've become fairly good at giving this response. My response was, you know, I agree, it sounds excellent, and I put some thought into who else I could suggest. But the real answer for why I was unwilling wasn't fair to the commitments that I'd already made. My existing students deserve that I should say no to this opportunity. You know, yeah, thanks, Simon. I'm looking for my students and thinking, like, you know, I mean, sometimes they wait a little longer than I would like already for feedback on their stuff and all those kinds of things. And so it was my choice for no was driven by and reflecting on the time when I'm like, Megan's given me something, and you know, she has to wait 3 days or 4 days or 5 days or whatever it might be. I wish it was always 3 days, wasn't it? But just that time when I can see it in my mind, like, I gotta get to this, and I just feel like I can't. so when I thought about that, I'm like, it's an easy no, right? And so I think that's kind of the subject that we're going to speak about a little bit is actually when you think about the things that you really need to do, saying no to the other things becomes quite a bit easier. I had the benefit many years ago, and I use this experience often when I talk about this subject, is I was a new faculty member, trying to make my way in the world, and a longtime friend and mentor of mine, I flew out to do some work with him in a different city, and we had breakfast in the morning, and I was talking to him about what I just agreed to, and he's like, "You're such an idiot, you know, like, why did you agree to these things?" And he like stopped, and he's like, he actually had a little elastic on his wrist, and he passed it to me, and he's like, "Okay, I want you to put this on." And I'm like, "This is so cheesy, thanks a lot, Alan, but all right, I'll do it." And I put it on. He's like, "Every time you're about to say, 'Sure, I can do that,' I want you to like hold it like this under the table and pull it up and snap it against your wrist and be like," and then you'll hear and reflect and be like, "Alan told me I need to say no." And he's like, "If you've got nothing more than like, just like snap it and then say, 'No, sorry, I can't do that.'" Just, we have to find a way that, you know, in academia, we are often the model that we're shown is the person that just says yes to everything, takes everything on, does way too much. And it's not good. It's not good for you. It doesn't let you focus on the most important things. It actually is the enemy of your productivity. And so don't die in opportunity. That's mine.
Yeah, no, thank you both. So people are still thinking about their question. I'm gonna ask you sort of the opposite of this. Like when you're thinking about the right opportunities or things that you're gonna say yes to, do you have criteria? What are those criteria?
You want to go first?
Sure, yeah, happy to go first. So I just applied for promotion to full professor, and like literally like only a couple of weeks ago. And so the cool thing about being in that role is that, or in that space, is that I can think about like, these are the promotable criteria. Like this is what I get judged on, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff that I've done in the last few years that didn't even get mentioned in those letters, right? And didn't even get mentioned on my CV. And I'm like, well, those are the things I shouldn't have done in the first place. Now, I say that there's chores to be done in any community like this, right? There's chores to be done on the farm, and sometimes you just have to do stuff. But I try hard to think about like, is this something that's going to help me advance in my own career? Is it going to help my students? And then I also ask the question about like, why did I pick academia in the first place, right? Like, it's certainly not, it's not for the money, right? Like, that's not it. And so there's something else in it for me. And so I think about those things. Like, what do I love at being on the cusp of being a professor, a full professor? Like, my publication count goes down and my presentations go down and my grant. It's not the end of the world. But what do I really want? I want to have an impact in the world. And then I stop and think about like, what work am I doing that's really helping the lives of people that I want to serve? And those are pretty grand things, but that's the criteria that I use for the things that I choose to do. And then I'll say really quickly one more before I get over to Katrina. I also volunteer for the jobs I want. So Fiona has the task of like assigning out, like who's going to do this and who's going to do this and who's going to do that. And instead of waiting for Fiona to ask me if I want to be on this group, I just go say, hey, I'm sure you're going to have a hard time finding people. I do that. I do that job because I'd rather be asked to do that job than do this job over here. Right? I'm being strategic. I'd rather vacuum than do the dishes. And so I'm like, I'll vacuum, right? Like that kind of stuff.
That is very strategic, actually. That's very smart. I'm definitely gonna try that.
Hopefully everybody volunteers now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's logistics to think about, right? Like, what are the things that we will be measured against in terms of promotion and all of that? But I think the other thing for me is what are my own career goals, and what is the sort of trajectory or the pathway that I envision for myself? And so if I know what my end goal is in terms of my career, then it helps me decide, what are the things that I need to say yes to in order to help me get there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big piece of it in terms of the practicalities of it. But I think the other side of it is, and if you haven't noticed, I am a very emotional person, and and I get emotionally attached to my work. And so I like to say yes to things that will fill my soul and fuel my passion rather than suck the soul out of me, which, you know, we have to do a lot of that too, and that's just part of it. But if I had a choice, I lean into the things that I will be energized by.
Yep.
And sometimes that is creating the opportunities or seeking them out first. And then I guess the third thing that I think about when it comes to something like a manuscript review or participating as a partner on somebody's grant, if I'm going to choose to review a manuscript, I get really excited to review it if I think I might learn something. You know, if there's something in the topic of that paper that I might learn that I don't already know. So that's a real driver for me in terms of saying yes to manuscripts. And then grants. I'm actually at the point, you know, I used to say yes all the time to grants because you get them on your CV, right? And sometimes when you go on somebody's grant, you don't actually have to do that much. You know, you just put your name on it and you go to some meetings and maybe help with the paper or something like that. But now I prefer to have some say in how the money is going to be spent. And especially, can I have some of the money?
Yeah.
You know, like if you're going after a $400,000 grant, like, can I have some of that for a student to help with a piece of the work? And that's a big reason why I would say yes.
The other thing that we do, Katrina, is I think about like, it's also really helpful to have somebody external just like kick the idea. I'd be like, hey,
100%.
should I do this? Right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, when we're talking about, I mean, again, we'll just lay all the, like, hey, we got a new OPH director search going on. We had conversations about, are we gonna apply to this? Are we gonna, you know, like, you have to ask the, you know, and talk to the people around you that know you, that know what's going on for you, that can be that sounding board, that understand your environment. So, you know, like, I've got lots of great friends in the audience of people that have been that for me through the years, just be like, hey, you know, is this good for me? Should I do this? And oftentimes Paul will be like, no, it's a terrible idea.
Unless it's helping Paul. But no, on that note, I rely on my mentors quite a lot for those conversations, right? And I have many mentors and lots of people who don't even know they're actually mentoring me, but I rely on them for those kinds of things. And it can just be a quick email, you know, like Lynn McIntyre. I don't know if any of you know Lynn McIntyre. She's been a mentor of mine for a really long time. And one of the reasons I love her is because she just like, it's so direct.
No problem telling you what she thinks, right? Yeah.
Exactly what she thinks. And so if I'm grappling with something, I'll ask her and she will be honest with me. And she will just say, I don't think that's the right choice for you right now, or yes, that would be an excellent choice.
Yeah.
So relying on my mentors is a big part of this.
Awesome. All right.
Got a question.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all these ways you guys have to evaluate and assess new opportunities. I mean, at some point, your plate is gonna be full.
Yeah.
And, you know, you assess the new ones, but how do you get out of?
Get rid of the old
already
ones?
committed to?
Yeah.
You go on sabbatical. I'm not even joking for like 100%. I think that's why sabbatical was created, is that like, you're like, I'm going away, I am out of everything.
Yeah.
And then I strategically come back. It's that like intentional reset of like, I'm away. This is no longer my responsibility.
Yeah.
Right? And then, but otherwise, you know, I'm on a grant. I agreed to one with, you know, and I just was realizing that I'm contributing nothing to this. I'm going to a weekly meeting where I sit for an hour. This is a total waste of my time. And so then I just carefully crafted an email that was like, look, like, I can't do this. Like, this is a waste of my time. I didn't say it that way, right? But like, you know, this is an ineffective use of my time. I'm happy to stay involved. If you need me, reach out to me. I'm still here, but I'm not going to come to a weekly meeting. And so just, you know, it's like trying to extricate yourself, but just be straight with them.
Yeah. I have one of those coming up. And it's a partnership grant. It's a national, multi-year, multi-million-dollar grant that I was invited to participate on. And I was hoping that it would be one of those ones where, you know, I have to help a little bit, but it ended up being all of the community engagement that they wrote into the grant, they just gave to me because that's what I do. And I didn't sign
You're
up.
good at it. I mean, that makes sense.
And so I am going to have to step off of that grant. And I will be honest, I wasn't aware the expectations when we started this, and, you know, things have changed for me, and I have to step off. But I think the other thing I think about, when I want to step away from something, for example, a community partnership, which, you know, maybe I spent 20 years in this partnership, is who can I pass it along to? You know, and I think this is a great opportunity in terms of, helping emergent scholars or new scholars or people wanting to make a shift in the work that they do. And I think a lot about who could I help? You know, who could I pass this along to? Who could take this up and move it forward and do a good job?
Provided it's an opportunity, because it's not just a millstone
For
that you're
sure.
hanging on and be like,
For
here you
sure,
go,
yeah.
good luck,
I
right?
don't want to give
Yeah.
people my garbage, you know?
Yeah.
Just to add on, with one thing that I've noticed in the help me proactively is to always ask about the term. So if you're agreeing to sit on a committee, one of my first questions is, how long is the term of appointment? Because then if it, you know, you're like, oh, this isn't working, but I committed to a year for this, like, that's my commitment, and then I start thinking about how I'm not gonna renew, but that's one sort of proactive way that I've used to sort of think about how long I might be in this if I'm not sure.
Jamie and Marie Coach.
Oh, I was just gonna say, this sounds like an advertisement for, the Institute has something called Propel Sessions. So you might have heard of internal peer review where we we line you up an application you want to submit with somebody that's gonna help you review a written draft. The Propel things are independent of any particular application, and it's about your kind of career decisions. And so I've sat through a lot of those and heard the wisdom of, you know, Bill Galley,
Lynn
McIntyre, Christine Friedenreich, these guys. And I've heard this question of saying no comes up all the time because, and especially I think in some, well, probably in all your conditions, right? Fiona, I need somebody on my team that knows health economics. Katrina, I need somebody who's good at community engagement. Tyler, I need somebody who does bioinformatics or biostats or whatever. And lots of like junior faculty would get pulled in all those directions and then never have kind of like their own niche. And that is something I heard in all these Propel sessions is what is your niche? And somebody like Christine was always saying, you build yourself like a roadmap of here's where I want to get to, and here's the stages I think I need to go to. So that if somebody comes to me and says, I need you on this grant, it's like, does that fit my roadmap? Well, yeah, it does. So I'm gonna say yes to this one or whatever. So I wonder if you have any questions on that, because that has come up so many times in those Propel sessions.
It was really helpful for me. I have had a few of those through my career and, you know, sat right over in that half of the room and heard Lynn McIntyre be like, you need to stop doing this, and you need to stop doing this, and you need to start doing this. And I was like, yes, ma'am. And it does help, like knowing that I might get called to the carpet again around like saying no. It's a little bit easier to be like, I gotta face Lynn if I say yes. And it's been really helpful for me to have that. So yeah, I think it's a great suggestion. I think that's part of what your no committee gives you as well. Even, you know, if you're not a faculty member, if you're a student and you're trying to, you know, decide what the opportunities are and things like that, like go ask your peers. But ask them to hold you accountable if you're like, well, this wasn't a good idea. You shouldn't have done this. Right? We'll all make those mistakes, right? But
We have an online question from Jennifer Jackson. How do you assess offers when you may only get an email or brief Zoom call to meet someone and discuss?
Good question.
Katrina?
That happens a lot. It happens all the time. Honestly, it does. And sometimes the answer is more work because you might need to actually book a meeting, you know, and get more information and talk to people to get the details. And so, you know, one of the things that I see happening a lot when it comes to like community engaged research is an ask will come, say, from a community agency to a scholar, or a scholar will go to a community agency with an ask, and they both love the idea and they say, let's do it, you know, without really sort of thoughtful planning, like who are our other partners, who in our organizations will support us, because those kinds of things fall apart really easily. And so, you know, that person, maybe the person in the community agency gets a new job, and now there are no champions in that organization anymore. And so that project completely falls apart. And so I do think you actually have to spend the time doing, you know, your due diligence, especially if it's somebody you don't know very well or a new relationship. it's really important to actually take the time to be thoughtful about it. You know, if it's a subject matter that is interesting to you, that's a great start. But you really have to know who you're working with and what the expectations will be.
I think that's a really good point. We use that strategy in lots of stuff that we do, and I would say it's like a, you know, you build in a gated approach to the response. So we do the same thing if we're doing a new partnership with Moderna or with Pfizer, and we're like, hey, we're gonna do something new, and be like, okay, I'll tell you what, we're both new to this. Let's develop a pilot project. Let's be like, okay, let's do 3 months worth of work, evaluate whether it was the right fit, whether it was good working together, and then we'll go on to the next project. I think you can do the same thing, even with just like a request, be like, you know, I'll give you a provisional yes. Sure, let's try this out. Let's reevaluate it in a month,
Give
a
yourself
week.
an out.
Give yourself that out to be like, you know what, this isn't working for me. And you've already declared up front that you're uncertain, instead of just being like, yep, I'm all in, let's go, right? Just say like, yeah, how about like this? How about we set the conditions like this? And so, and a one-off like phone call or Zoom meeting to try and, it's never enough. So I'm like, you know, this sounds encouraging. Let's continue to talk, but I don't commit hard at that point. I'm careful about, you know, yeah, this sounds encouraging. Let's set up a future meeting and let's rediscuss it. That's how I would answer Jennifer's question.
In both of those sort of answers I heard, like giving yourself time to think.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a formal rule that you invoke of like, never say yes in the first meeting, or you sort of force yourself to take a step back, or is it just more?
Well, I mean, I think for me, it depends who's asking.
Hmm.
And what the ask is. Some things are really easy to say yes to, you know, because you have a previous relationship with somebody, or it's something that you wanted to do for a long time. But yeah, I have found that is the most effective strategy for me, because I'm quite like impulsive, and you know, patience is not my strong suit. I have, you know, like you, I have 100 emails and I just want to, you know, so I just pause and I'll sleep on it and I'll wait till the next day. If I'm feeling pulled and drawn towards something because it's a good idea or it's from a student, but I don't really want to do it, I find the next day I have no problem saying no. Do you know what I mean? Like I
Yeah,
separate myself from the urgency of the ask and just take a minute, and then the next day, it's usually one day, and then it's much easier for me.
I don't have a hard rule, and there are times when I say yes in the moment, and I'm, you know, and there are other times when my inbox is so full that it might take me a few days to get back to me. So yeah, I don't have a hard and fast rule.
Just like that.
How do you approach saying no to somebody that maybe you don't know very well yet, but you are wanting to know better? Like, I find it's actually easier to say no to people that you know very well, because they know you and they know that maybe next time it's a yes or it's not the right fit. But you know, maybe if you're coming into a new space, you're meeting a lot of people, you're getting a lot of asks right away, you don't know all these people very well. How do you kind of tactically say no to that situation?
I usually start, thanks, Jess. I usually start by level setting, and like, it's not a lie for me to say like, look, I am so busy that, you know, I really need some time to figure this out. And then I do that little bit of a feel out phase, right? I actually really prefer working with people that I already, you know, have at least some time with, that I know that it's because like academia is busy and stressful, so you might as well work with people that you like and get along with, right? So start by, you know, try to do that little bit of feel out process before you commit all the way. You know, it's kind of skirting your answer a little bit, but that's what I would do. You know, but I intentionally try and sometimes you have to take some risks, and you're like, hey, look, like I'm in, you know, I want to get to know you. I'm going to figure this out. And there's been lots of times where I did that, and it, you know, it's like, you're a fool. I don't want to work with you, right? And those people exist out there. So, yeah. That's not much of an answer, but that's what I'll say.
I mean, it's a really good question, because I don't think I thought of it that way. When you started asking that question, I thought, you know, how do you say no to somebody you don't know very well? I'm like, that's the easy one to say no to.
Yeah.
You know, but your second point around, maybe it's somebody that you want to work with. So that's a whole other thing. And so, I think most of the time in those situations, I probably would lean towards yes. But, there have been a couple of situations where I would just very honestly say, I can't do this now, but I would really like to talk about this again. Or, you know, I would keep me in mind for future opportunities, or let's circle back in a couple of weeks and talk about this again. Just to sort of keep that line of communication going and that sort of sense of hope, rather than just a hard no.
I would say the one thing I've been thinking about leading up to this is, how do you say no though to like Todd Anderson calls
Yeah,
and he's like, I need you to do this. And you're like, oh, for pity's sake, there's no way I can fit that in.
yeah.
And so how do you carefully say no to the seemingly impossible no,
Mhm.
right? And I've given that one a good deal of thought. And so maybe these strategies would work well in that situation as well. If it's somebody that is like your reports to, right? Somebody like Todd or Fiona, or so don't let Fiona know my secret. Usually I just put it back to them. So like if Fiona came and said, Tyler, I need you to teach 4 new classes starting next semester. And I'm like, right? After I collect myself and chuckle a little bit, I'm like, there's no way that I could possibly do that. I would then ask back to her, thank you, Fiona. Thanks for asking me that. You know, I appreciate that's a big time commitment. Teaching 4 new classes would take a ton of my time. Which of these 2 things do you think I should give up to be able to make that a reality? So put the decision making back on them. You can use this with your supervisor, right? Like your supervisor's asking you something that's like, you're like, man, how do I, okay, that's a great question. Thank you for asking me to help do this other project that's a side project. You know, that would probably mean that I have to delay my thesis work, right? Or I'd have to give up this. Would it be, is it more important to you that I do that or that I do that? And then let it rest with them for a little bit. And they'll come back and be like, oh, you know, you just keep deferring the decision making back to them. So that's one way to try and deal with the impossible no.
That's actually a really good strategy, especially for students.
Yeah.
Right, with your supervisors, yeah.
And I just, oh, sorry,
Sorry, I just wanted to finish that off and say, because another thread through that is, there are some opportunities that will come to you that you need to say yes to.
Yeah, that's really key. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you know, when Todd calls, depending on what it is.
Just say
you're
yes.
like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
tricky for me to take on.
Yeah.
How could you support me to make this work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, no is.
It's not a real
depending on it,
answer.
like,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's totally appropriate to say no to Todd, but, like sometimes there are things that you just have to do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you.
and I would say, when you think of it, that I think, faculty members, researchers, you're all used to, and lots of people on my team are used to doing things 100%. And you're not gonna do it unless you can do it the best possible way you know how. And lots of people, when they're asking for something, like, for example, when the institute's asking for you to do an IPR or whatever, the best you can, all you can give me is an hour or 2. The best you can give me an hour or 2 is great. That's what I want. And maybe that request from the dean is like, it's not gonna be excellent, but what you can give me in an hour is better than what I can get from like 10 hours or paying somebody or whatever, right? So I hope people consider that too. Like, is your 50% gonna be good enough and really appreciated by the person that's asking? You don't always have to give like 100% A++.
Yeah, and that's another way to do that same thing that we were just talking about. Like, you know, again, really appreciate your comment, Fiona, about like sometimes you just have to do it. But to be able to say like, okay, you know, what you're asking me is gonna be a challenge or whatever. This is what I think I could probably do. This is how I could do that, right? You know, I wish I had more time, or I wish I had, you know, whatever, but I could do it like this, right? Jamie and I've had that same conversation multiple times for IPRs, right? Like, sure, I can give you a couple of hours. That's the best I can do before the grant deadline.
I had a question, it's tied a little bit into this, so hopefully it's not too repetitive, but I'm thinking of a scenario where I usually say yes to everything. Most of the
Well, we're all here. We all, yeah.
But whatever scenario, like I'm thinking specifically a lab scenario where it's been stated, you know, these are a lab expectations that everyone is working, everybody's thing, and everyone has to be available all the time to answer questions from other people or help out. So the opportunity to say no is really there. Things are more so assigned to you rather than asked. And then my second part to that question is, if you are to say no, most of the time saying just, I don't have the capacity isn't really enough. So when there's that power dynamic existing between your lab supervisor, how would you go about responding to that?
I mean, let's be honest, there is a power.
Huge power dynamic, yeah.
This whole institution is hierarchical.
Yeah.
And when you come in, you know, I think about the block week. Did anybody just finish the block week class? For new grad students? Yeah. I've had quite a few students come and see me after that, and they're very overwhelmed by the expectations after that block week. And it doesn't necessarily come from the faculty, it sometimes comes from your peers. And there's multiple specializations here that have different expectations in their disciplines, right? And so, you know, there are expectations around publication and conferences and lab work and all of that. And so those are all very, very real. And I think just knowing and saying out loud that those hierarchies exist is really important. As a supervisor, I mean, I do think it is supervisor by supervisor. As a supervisor, if my student came to me and said, I don't have capacity, I would believe them, you know, and I would do what I can to try and help them think about how do you find the balance? But I recognize that not everybody is like that. And so I say this over and over again in many, many different situations, but I think relationship building is so key. If you can do whatever you can to build just an open, transparent, good communication relationship with your supervisor, I think you know, of course, depending on their time, but you know, it's probably easier for you to just be honest and say, you know, I'm really struggling with this. Don't put this on right now. And if you were ever in a situation where you didn't get supportive response from your supervisor, just know that you have options. You know, there are other people that you can go to and talk to get some advice. Bonnie Lashowitz, who was our graduate program director, you know, is a huge advocate for students. She will support you if you're struggling with that relationship, or if you're struggling to navigate a difficult conversation that you might need to have. I would say rely on the resources that you have available to you.
So can I flip it around a tiny bit? So I completely understand the situation that you're in, and if I was in that situation, I would probably try and, you know, be like, look, like, you know, I can't, I don't know. I'd try and put it back to them. That's probably the strategy I would use. But I do want, and I agree with Katrina that, like, if my student came to me and said, like, look, I just don't have time to do what you're asking of me, I would believe. I also would suggest that you go find a supervisor. Like, that's a criteria you should be looking for in a supervisor, like a really truly understanding, you know, sympathetic, empathetic individual. But there is a but. I also think that you want to be like, you want to be the person that's like, yeah, I'm committed to the team. So I fear a tiny bit that in all of this no saying that we're talking about, that we don't get the, like, I don't just say no to everything, right? I think that everybody that I work with knows that I am committed, that I am there, that when Dean Meddings calls me on a Saturday morning and says, hey, I need you to do this, it's ready to go Monday morning, right? That was one exception, but like, there are plenty of examples of the other side. So, you know, my response to your question, I would push back. I would also carefully look and be like, look, you know, is this a pattern or is this a one-off, right? Because you also want to be the team member that, like, you know, changes your personal plans a little bit to help out with the team. Not every time, for sure, but one time, maybe, you know. So just, there's a balance there. And if it's a pattern of, like, my supervisor never respects, like, calls me on Saturday night and is like, I need this Monday morning, you're like get lost, right? You know, like, it's my time. So yeah. There was a question back there. I don't know if
Yeah.
And then
Yeah,
and then
so-
you two.
Two things, I guess, one kind of a comment and one a question, both centered around the view of, like, wellness, I guess. So the first thing, Tyler, is super interesting. You're kind of walking through the, you know, sort of thoughts that you had during the promotion. So I had the same thing, but in a way it was a little bit the opposite for me. So going through for associate, for sure, I kind of stepped back and said, what's this next phase going to be like? And, you know, included some of the things that, you know, I want to start to move the needle more, so less stuff, but more impactful stuff.
Yeah.
But then the other side of it for me was actually, you know, things that fill my cup. So, you know, ethic, legal, contracts, clinical work, all those things sometimes, like, empty my cup.
Sure.
But things that might fill it, even though they might never show up on my CV or, like, in mentorship.
Yep.
Saying yes to Jamie asking for some. No, I mean it, right?
Yeah, I agree too.
Things forward, or, you know, mentorship, you know, things like that never really show up anywhere. passionate about what you're doing, you like it, but the metrics will probably come to the extent they need them to. So that for me was kind of a big, just used up for my own, enjoyment, which doesn't necessarily show up. So that's just a bit of a different spin. And then my question to both of you is, following that same theme, knowing what you know about wellness, what role is there for just answering with a frank answer, saying that used to fit, saying, I'd love to, but I'm committed, I'm gonna follow whatever, I find a little way out. But now I've just taken to saying, this sounds great, it sounds tempting, it sounds impactful, all those things, but I'm tapped out. I've used up all the travel credit. Or feeling a little burnt out last month, can't say yes right now, let it talk to the year, do this, blah, blah, blah. I've just taken to being totally honest and vulnerable. So I can see both sides of it, right? Especially if you're super junior, giving that answer might not be received, the best way. So wonder what your thoughts are about that.
Really good point.
Before you jump in, can I just say something? So I noticed you said these activities that don't show up anywhere. And so my advice from where I stand is find a way to make them count. Like, it's taking time. It's, time, if it's not happening in your work day, it's happening in your personal lifetime. So find a way to put that on your CV. And, at first I think you might not feel silly being like, oh, we spent 5 hours having coffee mentoring someone for a particular issue, but like, that's important work that without it, the university and the academy doesn't function.
Yeah.
So like, put it on your CV. And like, that's my advice to everybody. Like, if you have a lot of that work that you feel like, okay, it's not showing up, either stop doing it or make it show up.
Who gave me that advice?
Did you follow it?
Of course I did. And, like when we just went through this merit process, as faculty members, every couple of years, we have to prove our worth and show that we deserve to be here if we want a 1.5% raise in our salary. So I'm not joking.
I know exactly what it is.
I'm not joking. Anyway, but we have to go through this big process to talk about what we accomplished. And then this time around, there was an extra bump if you went above and beyond. So outstanding, right? We had an opportunity to write another document about how we didn't just do what was expected, we did way more than was expected. And I had a conversation with you about it, and I said, I'm a social scientist, right? Like, I work in homelessness, and I, that kind of work that I do is really kind of strange in a medical faculty. And yet I'm being measured against all of these bench scientists and health services researchers who show up the way they're supposed to show up in a medical school. I don't show up that way. And I was and I said to you, I don't think I'm going to do this. Like, I'm not going to get the outstanding, so this is my thinking on it. I'm not going to get it because I just don't compare in the same ways as these bench scientists. I don't think the same metrics. Thank you. That's what I'm trying to say. And you said, you have to do it. You have to do it because they have to understand what your work is. This is an opportunity for them to walk the walk, to walk the talk, to do what they say they're going to do. And your story helps them understand that. And so that was hard. Yes, that was hard for me to say yes, because it was a lot of extra work. And, I have no idea if I'm going to get it or not, but I did it. And I did it because you're right. That story needs to be told. Yeah.
I also, sure, let's move on. I can make my other comment. I'll leave it in later.
I guess also the other thing I'll just say on your reasons for no is, I wonder if part of it is to do with seniority, because now I used to sort of hide behind my kids, and I use that in quotation marks because like being a mom is actually a thing that I do that actually takes time, and I'm actually with my kids.
Yeah.
But I used to offer that a lot, like, oh, I got kids stuff going on, and then nobody can push back, right? And now I'm just like, I don't feel the need to explain to you why I'm not doing that anymore. I'm sorry, I can't make that work. And like, I don't justify.
Not available.
Yeah.
Not available.
And so I don't know if you guys have also found that changed over your career.
I think it's way easier actually now after COVID. Everybody's burnt out. Everybody's tired. Everybody's stressed. And yeah, I think what you say, like, just come out and say, you know what, I can't do this right now. And I think it's much easier to say that now than it used to be.
There's a question at the back and there's a question online.
All right, you should just share.
We're all visiting. We should have brought you a chair. So we should have done.
about the phrasing and no and rationales for no. And we've also talked a lot about the rationales for yeses. Something that our learner level, like I'm experiencing right now, but also a transitionary level in one of the hats that I wear while still being to junior learner for me in my MSc. Something I have difficulty with is reflecting on what boundaries or what opportunities I need to set to be appropriate of A, the hat that I'm wearing at the time, and B, that I have the skills necessary to do the job that I need at. So for example, I was recently asked, based on previous area of work, to be a reviewer for a journal, to be a reviewer. And I said, absolutely not, I need the skills. I cannot wear that hat because I don't feel qualified. And that's a very easy one for me, because I didn't feel like my academic team was sufficient for that job. But in another year, another time, they can serve for that thing, we raise it up. But there's a lot of things that you get asked at this stage of your training. Perhaps it's mentoring, say, an undergrad student or a I'm in the world, so if I'm a student or a resident that are kind of unique, where you're looking your hats to in that hierarchy, so to speak. So, like, what measures have you used, not now being the accomplished senior people that you are, but throughout your building to determine which opportunities you feel qualified for? To challenge yourself and push you out of the boundary that you're setting for yourself, but also acknowledge your own responsibility to saying no.
Yeah, that's fair. I really appreciate that. I'm not the right person to ask this question though. First of all, I took 6 years to do my PhD, so I said yes to everything, and it cost me 2 extra years on my PhD. So, you know, I've learned these skills after I was a learner, and the other reason why I'm not necessarily the right person to ask the question is that, like, I'll jokingly say it's because I'm so arrogant. I think I can do everything, but like that is a bit of a problem that I have. For me, is that I'm like, yeah, I can do that. I can do that. And I'm like, whoa, I'm not really qualified to do this. But all joking aside, I have, and I had back then, and continue to have a few mentors that are outside of this, like, you know, not my supervisor, not my, you know, and I have one mentor who's been my mentor since I was an undergraduate student, and I adore this person. And you know, we check in less now. But if I was in that situation, he was the person I'd call. Be like, hey, look, you know, am I in a position to do this? Because sometimes it's just somebody that knows you well enough, that's outside of that can give you that objective opinion. When you said no to reviewing for the journal, you know, my first reaction was like, that's a great learning opportunity. So sometimes you'll get pushed into things where you're like, I am underqualified. That's what learning is about, is like feeling underqualified for the things that you're doing, and, you know, being asked to supervise, being asked to teach, and you're like, wow, I really don't feel qualified for this. Say that. You're like, look, you know, that's intimidating to me. I don't feel qualified for it. And then ask for some support and be like, hey, you know, if I get over my head here, can I come to you and ask? Can I get some support? You know, I think it's a great opportunity for students to grow and stretch. And so I create those opportunities for my students where I'm like, you don't know how to do this yet. You'll figure it out. I'm sure you will. And when you don't, if you stuck, come find me, right? You know, I'm here for you. Yeah.
I constantly feel out of my comfort zone, like all the time.
Yeah.
And I think, but when I think about your example about being an article, like a journal reviewer, article reviewer, I never had any training on how to review an article.
Right.
The first time I was asked to do it, I thought, oh, this will be fun.
Yeah.
You know, and then I started reading it and I thought, I hope I have something of value to say about this, like, because I don't know, you know, nobody ever told me this is how you review an article.
You
like,
agonize over it, right? Yeah.
agonize over it. And then, you know, and then I went back, you know, I did it and I sat on it for a day, and then I went back and I looked at it and I thought, that's actually really good. Like, those comments are really good and they're valid and they make sense because I'm reading this from my perspective, and these are the questions that come up for me. that weren't answered in this article. Really, that's what article review is, I think. And so I agree. I think those things are great learning opportunities, and just know the other people that are reviewing the article probably don't have any background or training on how to review articles either. You know, we get asked to review grant applications. I didn't take a class in that, or, you know. So yeah, it is one of those things that you can just work your way through, and I think that's actually a safe one to step into when you're ready. You know, that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. We're
Yeah,
picking on that. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
And imposter syndrome is real.
Yeah.
And part of it is because there are, you know, this is a competitive place, and there's a lot of expectations placed on us and these metrics that we have to reach. And so, you know, like, even as you said, we're senior, and you meant experience, not old, right?
Yeah.
You know, we still have to, in lots of ways, prove our value and show that we deserve to be here through all of these things. And so imposter syndrome is real, but just don't let it cripple you, because everybody is grappling with all of those things that you are grappling with.
Can I make one really fast comment? I'll go to Rachel.
Yeah, time is it?
You should all go ask your supervisor, say like, I'd love to review a journal article at some
Yeah.
point.
Help me.
Can you, when there's one that comes across here, because we get them like 5 a week.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so just say, hey, when there's one that's a good fit for me, I'd love to do it with you. And
That's a
it's
great
very
idea.
easy to do,
That's a
very
great
easy
idea.
for a student to review with a student supervisor. Yeah.
I think just to like succinctly say, I think what I heard in there is really asking yourself the question, why is this good for me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think we often ask like, why am I good for this opportunity? And we forget to ask that question of like, why is it good for me?
Well said.
And if you can't answer that question, it's not the right opportunity. for you.
Yep, good point.
So we have 2 tips and then some questions are kind of piling up, but Janine said that a strategy I use with my students is completing the UOC's memorandum of understanding that outlines expectations for communication, hours of work, etc. And I find that really helps me be accountable as a supervisor, but also for my student. And Tolu said he documents his previous and current commitments and revises the document frequently, helping him to avoid saying yes to requests on the fly.
Is biostats starting right now?
Yes, it is. Good luck with biostats, everybody.
Down, no, please, don't worry at all. I just wanted to kind of close this down a little bit and then we can chat. There's lots of food at the back. So much for your insights and your great questions today. There is some science about this. And so one of the groups that I follow, and they recently published on this question of saying no. It's a group of 4 female scientists who met when they were PhDs at the same university, but very, very different kind of methodological and disciplinary groundings. And they kept in touch throughout their careers and supported each other through their careers. And so when COVID hit, they got together for their regular drinks, I suppose, and realized they were all feeling overwhelmed. So they committed to each other that they would say no for a year. And then they published on this experience. And so just, I wanted to share with you the 4 things that they noticed after this. So 1, they tracked their tasks so that helped them to understand what they were saying yes and no to, and it helped them to quantify what their limits were. So for example, they realized that they could review 1 journal article a month. That was their depth. And so tracking that data really helped, which is what Tolu also said. They also recognize that they don't say no often enough. Despite saying no for a whole year, they all felt burnt out and overwhelmed at the end of the year anyways. So they didn't say no often enough, and they didn't say no to big enough things. They recognize that saying no is very emotional work, and you heard that here. A lot of thought goes into preparing to say no. There was feelings of guilt that they noted about letting their colleagues down, about feeling like maybe they weren't carrying their fair share. They also helps them to pick collaborators who respected their boundaries. And they noticed that some no's were treated with grace from their colleagues, and others sort of led to some repercussions. And that was very helpful learning for them about who they wanted to work with in the future. And their last thing was that they are terrible at saying no. And so they practice. Find a friend, practice saying no.
In a safe place.
Get an elastic, put it on your wrist.
Yeah.
Not joking.
Strategies. The last thing I just wanted to share is that next week, the OIPH postdoc group is having a networking lunch. Check in with Kara at the back if you need more details. And then the email, if you're interested, is opsa@ucalc.ca. So hopefully it's just postdocs, right? Yeah. So if you're a postdoc, You want to go to lunch? It's happening next Tuesday. Thank you again for coming. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. Really excited to see you back for September, and we'll see you again in October.
Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you.